It was late spring in my 7th year of school. It was a rough school in a sketchy area. I was in the 3rd year of my middle school, crafting a magnet program to better integrate the classes, and the enrollment for the program was small. Even smaller numbers for female, so making female friends in an isolated environment as this was difficult at best. That's when I met Sabrina. She was non-magnet and wanted to have me and her friend Kylie spend the night, so I was thrilled. She lived in an apartment with her mother and brother that was across from a racetrack and a bar. Super sketchy area. Her mother sold handmade keychains at the flea market each weekend. This is important later. Things get weird about the time we get pizza and movies. Her mother was a little odd and hung out the whole time. Like she was a 13-year-old girl and regularly going into her room and calling Sabrina. We couldn't ask what was up because her mum was always there, and this was the age of pages. So around 9 p.m. she goes to bed. To our dismay, 10 minutes later, she's calling Sabrina to come to bed too. She was actually going to stay with her mum at her own sleepover, so left with a few pillows that had seen better days and no blankets, Kylie and I were going to have a sleepover to ourselves. We start the movie back up, and suddenly Sabrina comes out to get the phone. As she is about to go back into the room, she whispers, "Don't stay up late. We have to go to work at the flea market tomorrow and leave at 5:30. I guess she saw our faces and she giggles this creepy giggle and adds, "You didn't think the pizza was for free, did you?" Then she goes into the room and locks the door. Kylie, who I had just met this evening, and I exchange glances. This was the first we heard about this. We were never even asked. After a short conversation, we decided we wanted to go home. Our parents were more likely to be awake now than they would at 5:30 in the morning, so we knock on the bedroom door, to no answer. We try and try, but nothing. There's no way they're asleep that fast, so I go to the kitchen to see if there's another phone. Nope. They locked us in the living room of this one-bedroom apartment with no phone and no restroom, and now they weren't responding at all. This is where the young and dumb formulate a plan. We know school isn't very far away, and Kylie says she lives near school, so we decide to find a payphone or walk to her house. How bad could it be? Biggest mistake of our lives. We try knocking one last time to the same result, so we gather our belongings and leave. How the world outside changed after 10 p.m. The bar a stone's throw away from the apartment was jumping. We go up to the payphone that's near the street and close to the rear of the bar. It's broken. As I put down the receiver, some burly, drunk man rounds the corner towards us. We were two 13-year-olds that could have passed for 17 easily. Neither of us were dressed showing much skin, but Mr. Drunk Dude liked what he saw. First he yelled if we wanted a party, or if he could buy us drinks. "No thanks," we replied, and started to walk in the direction of her home. This only infuriated him, as he's now yelling that we're skanks, and nobody turns their back on him. We keep on. He starts to stumble after us, and catches Kylie by the wrist. She's trying to shake him off to no avail, and he's telling us what he's going to do to us. We're getting terrified because she can't break the hold and he won't let go. That's when Kylie lands a shot into his crown jewels. We take off running, but the shot must have sobered him up, and he's angrier in pursuit. We scan the area. There's no place to hide, no place to get help, and we're now not trusting if we saw anyone that would help us. We run loops around the apartment Sabrina lived in, but somehow one of Mr. Drunk's friends had joined in. we knew they were behind us, and that they are alienating, tailing us, and the yelling to his friends, saying that there's one for each of us. So, to not let us get away. Now we know we're trapped, so we book it up some random metal stairs. We hit the second floor, are banging doors but nobody is opening them. Luckily we find an open door at the end, and we think we're in the clear. But then we hear constant clanking and one of them is coming up, but the stairs have no second floor visibility. We dash into the room only to see it's a laundry room, with no door to lock. We start wedging ourselves behind the machines, praying and hoping we're not found, because he's now on the second floor and heading our way. It goes quiet, except music and voices from the bar. He didn't leave, I think. I didn't hear the stairs. That's when the aroma of smoke and alcohol descends upon the heavy air. He's in the door listening, and then he speaks. I know you're in there, girls. There's nowhere for you to go. If you come out now, I'll forgive the one that kicked my nuts and go easy on you both. Come on out. After a moment, he spoke again. His mood flipped. Okay, I'm gonna yank you out by your hair and rough it up. I'd like to say that someone overheard all of this and intervened, but they didn't. After what seemed like an eternity, he stood there for 10 minutes. We heard him descend the stairs, and we were hiding an additional 15 minutes before checking to see if it was safe to leave. Long story short, we made it to Kylie's house, which was not as close as she said, but we had our lives. My father came to get me after midnight. The next morning, Sabrina's mother called and feigned cluelessness as to why we would leave, claiming we didn't knock, lied about taking the phone, and thought it was normal to make her daughter's friends have to work for free. Sabrina and I didn't speak much after Kylie's parents believed all of Sabrina's mother's nonsense and grounded her for a month. This was a long time ago, but it has stayed haunting me since. This happened when I was around 1st to 3rd grade, which is approximately around 10 to 12 years ago. But this specific memory has permanently scarred me until now, and is most likely the reason I am no longer a religious person. In the Philippines, the majority of our schools are Catholic. Some private schools require students to go to church every first Friday of the month. The school I went to back in elementary was one of those. Basically, every first Friday of the month, the students would gather in their respective classrooms. First, before all of us would be led to the church, and the church we went to was connected to our school. Each grade and section had their own areas in the church, so our teachers would be able to monitor us. The pews my classmates and I sat on were around 10 rows away from the altar, so it was pretty close to the front. The nuns and other church staff usually sat at the 1st to 3rd rows. I'm not sure if churches in other countries do this, but at the end of the ceremony here, people clap in celebration after hearing Mass. I was sitting next to my close friend, and we decided to do something funny. We were around 8 at the time, so our decision-making skills weren't really the best. While the priest was saying the final blessing before ending the Mass, my friend and I decided to clap. It was only one clap, but it was a loud one. The sound echoed in the church loud enough to catch the nuns' attention. Finally, the Mass ended, and the students were led back to their classrooms, except our row. Enter the nun. She was old, between 60 to 70, wearing a black habit, and was very wrinkly. She marched towards our area fuming, and started demanding as to who made the clap noise. I ended up admitting it was me, but my friend didn't, so it was only me who got into trouble. The nun told my advisor to let me stay in the church, and my teacher obliged, gathered the rest of the students, and left. I was alone at this point, and bawling. The nun went off somewhere, and I was a small 8-year-old child who was left alone in a big church, aside from the janitor, who was cleaning the floors. Chills were literally running through my body. How would you feel if you were left alone with all these scary statues looking down upon you? The atmosphere felt really creepy and eerie. The design and architecture of the church was Gothic, so it only fueled my fear further. When the janitor began to clean near my area, I was begging him to let me out of the church, but he refused, stating that he was only following orders. Eventually, the nun comes back for me, grabs my wrist harshly, and tugs me out of the church and into their sleeping quarters. Quick note: in private schools in the Philippines, nuns and priests were residents and had sleeping quarters within campus. While the nun literally dragged me to their sleeping quarters, I grabbed onto a ledge near the gate, still screaming and thrashing around. We were outside this time, and the nannies and other guardians of the other students were looking on, but none of them did anything to intervene. I spot my nanny from afar and can see her looking at me in concern, but she stayed rooted to her spot. Once we were inside the nun's sleeping quarters, she throws me to the bed and begins yelling, telling me what I did was wrong and that I have sinned, and threatened me that she would lock me up in her room for a week. She even locked her door for emphasis. I was beyond scared at this point. She looked at me in the eyes and asked me if I would do it again, shaking her finger in my face. I shook my head furiously, and I remember her reiterating that she'd keep me in her room, but for only 3 days this time. I told her I would never do it again, and after what seemed like hours, she finally let me out. I was shaking when I returned to the classroom. We didn't really do anything to report the incident. I'm not sure if my nanny told my parents what happened, but if they did, they didn't come forward to file a complaint. So to this day, while entering that church, I still get goosebumps. My family gets very annoyed at me when I don't go to church on Sunday, but at this point, I really don't care. The Malay people, like any other people around the world, have numerous folk beliefs and superstitions. In the Malay Peninsula today, West Malaysia, there is a superstition called Saka. Legend has it that Saka begins with someone striking a deal with a supernatural entity, a djinn for example, to have the entity do something for them. This can range from helping their property safely to getting them rich, or most commonly, to give them specific abilities, such as midwifery or healing supernatural ailments. The deal involves the person promising that his descendants will take care of the entity when they are gone, and the entity promising to bestow the same aid to the descendant. Things become problematic when the descendant doesn't want to continue with the deal and rejects the legacy. The following is a story of one such situation that I encountered when I was very young. At the time, my family and I lived in a village just outside a town not far from Kuala Lumpur. Our compound bordered a much larger compound which belonged to a religious teacher whom the locals affectionately called Lek. I think it's a term of endearment and respect from an older man in Javanese, but my Javanese isn't that good. The compound was a large one. It comprises a large traditional style house, a small grove of fruit trees, and a small hut in the middle of the grove. There were always people coming and going at the house. Many of the local children go to the house to learn to recite the Quran from Lek. Lek's family was also rather large. Then there was a man who lived in the hut in the grove. Most people didn't give him a second look, but those who have interacted with him soon realized that there was something odd about the man. He was pleasant, friendly, and polite. He was also very ready to offer a hand when you needed help with something. The villagers noted that he seemed educated, intelligent, and even spoke English fluently. He, however, always had a look that can be best described as haunted. He also never ventured out of the compound after dark. Every night, he would promptly retire to the hut after Isyak prayers and dinner at Lex's house. Another thing that intrigued the locals was that this man would often get visitors coming to see him. These visitors came in luxurious cars but never stayed past sundown. The rest of the story I garnered from conversations of older people around me. Honestly, I never paid much attention to the man. I was in my early teens, and there were much more interesting things for me to do. But the conversations were there, and I apparently have a good memory. The man was indeed well educated and rich. He apparently had rich parents who provided him with the best of everything, from education to clothes and more. After graduating from an overseas university, he returned and started to work with his father to run the family company. He proved to be a talented businessman, and within a few years he had been instrumental to take the company to greater heights. The years went by, the man married, and soon began to raise a family of his own. His children also proved to be just as intelligent as he was, and were very good students. He sent them overseas to study, and they returned with their qualifications. His eldest son came to work with him at the company. His second son decided to start his own, which became successful, and his only daughter decided to become an academician. She too was successful and excelled in her field. The man's father grew old and frail. Not long before he passed, he called for the man to see him when he was in the hospital. The man's father told him a family secret. He said that their family had a legacy. The man's father told him that it is necessary for the eldest of the family to continue the pact that their ancestors had made with a djinn. The djinn promised to make the keeper rich, and in return, the legacy bearer would have to perform a ritual for the djinn at a specific time every month. If not, the djinn would do bad things to the legacy bearer. The father then said that it is time for him to pass the legacy on to the man. The man, however, was religious, and he recognized that in Islam it is forbidden to make a pact with a supernatural entity, especially jinns, so he refused. His father told him that if he did not receive the legacy willingly, the djinn would not leave him in peace until he accepts the pact. Still, the man refused. Shortly after, the man passed away. They say he did not pass peacefully, but I do not remember more details than that. That's when the man's troubles began. At first, he started seeing glimpses of shadows darting around him wherever he went, especially at night. This didn't last too long, until he began to hear his name being called from random directions. He began to feel ill for unexplainable reasons. His doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him, but after nightfall he would regularly develop a slight fever. Then began the nightmares. In it, he would find himself in his ancestral home, where he would meet an old man dressed in black. The old man would hand him a book which was wrapped in a yellow cloth. The man knew what this meant, so he refused it every time, and then the man would morph into something black with long bony fingers and sharp nails. The creature would then strangle the man, at which point he would wake up covered in sweat. Occasionally, he would find scratches on his neck. They looked like they were made by claws or fingernails. The man tried to ignore all of this, but his wife and children began to experience it too. He knew he had to do something about it. At first, he tried performing the pertinent prayers to ward off the evil spirits. It worked for a while, but it always returned. The family then had disturbing experiences escalate. At that point, the man knew he needed to seek help. Then his wife grew ill, and she passed. The man was now determined more than ever to rid himself of the djinn. He began to seek help from bomos, traditional shamans, but he soon discovered there were many charlatans among them. He also realized that some of them used practices that were not condoned by his religion and made more pacts with supernatural entities. He was also introduced to religious teachers that taught him more specific prayers which helped a little, But the experiences didn't go away. Finally, someone introduced him to Lek. He met with Lek at Lek's house one day after Lek's Quran class and his students had gone home. I don't know which rituals or prayers Lek had used, but he did ascertain that there was indeed a djinn coming after him. They then tried to exorcise the djinn, but it did not work. After a few more sessions, the disturbances against his family stopped, but the djinn now seemed to concentrate his efforts on the man. The man said he would only be at peace when he was at Lek's place, so he asked Lek to teach him how he could defeat the djinn, and sent it on its way. It was to be a long process, and there was much to learn. Moreover, the man could still not find peace at home, and then asked if he could stay at Lek's place, but he did not want to impose on the family's privacy. So they decided to do what they did in the old days. The man relinquished the control of his company to his son, who was already running it successfully in his constant absence. He then built, with Lek's permission, a hut in Lek's compound near the fruit trees. It was actually quite nice. While it was like a studio apartment but on the ground, the man moved in shortly after. For years the man stayed there and looked after Lek's fruit trees when he was not learning from Lek. The children would come to visit him often. He was there for years until Lek passed. He died in a hit and run. I don't know if the driver was caught. By that time the man had learnt the knowledge that he needed to, and the necessary skills, so he thanked Lek's family for their hospitality and left the hut as a thank you gift to them. They said the man returned to his home and not long after confronting the djinn, successfully vanquished it. They said that the knowledge and skill that he had learned from Lek enabled him to help others with the same problem he had too. I am the eldest of 3 brothers, and this is some number of years ago now. I was 13 while my brothers were 11 and 9 respectively. We had been down the local park to play football and kill some time before it was time to sleep. School tomorrow. Great. This was our mindset at the time, so we greatly enjoyed burning off steam, running around and screaming at each other. It always got competitive, but in a fun, brotherly kind of way. We noticed a man in the distance, looking in our general direction, and it was still light and a public park, so we didn't think anything of it. However, we did note that it was kind of strange that he just stood there in the middle of the path. No dog, no children, no friends, nothing. My youngest brother also pointed out that he was wearing a trench coat. It was hot out, so pretty weird we thought, but we skipped over it as we found it kind of funny, as you can imagine, being young and immature, and found it in some ways amusing. You know that cliche that weirdos and creepers wear these coats. We made jokes that he was completely naked under there, and that some poor soul would eventually be exposed to this man's full nudity. We soon forgot about it and continued with our game. With the sun setting, we decided it was time to go. This was around a half hour after we'd seen the man, and to be honest, we had completely forgotten about him in our competitiveness. We look up, and he's still there. He hadn't moved an inch. This creeped us out, so we walked the long way back towards town, as he was blocking the shortcut, and none of us really wanted to pass by him. He was tall, and we aren't a particularly tall family. Even at that age, we were short, and this guy was easily over 6 foot. But it was hard to tell from where we were standing. Regardless, he was too tall to risk anything. We headed home teasing each other the other way for letting that guy creep us out, even though he didn't really do anything, accusing each other of pissing our pants and crying. It was quite funny in truth, as brotherly teasing is at that age, especially when you're all in on the joke, or the subject at least. Once we arrived at town and continued past the shops and takeaway places, my youngest brother insists we go grab something to eat. He complains he's starving and hasn't eaten since lunch. It was the same case for all of us, so we agree and head to our local takeaway. It wasn't great, but it was cheap, and being kids we didn't have much money, so it was perfect for us. A burger and some chips for £2. I can't lie, a great deal. We order, pay up, and sit down as usual waiting for food. We start talking and messing around. We didn't even look when the door chimed to let us know somebody had come into the establishment. Why would we? I'm sitting on the far right, facing nothing in particular, while my brothers are sat facing each other. They're arguing about something, and I'm sat there bored and hungry, and I began to scan the room, when I look directly to my left and my heart drops. Who do I see sat on the table opposite ours? None other than the guy from the park. The trenchcoat guy staring at us, and I mean really staring. He's closer now, so I can see him. His eyes are wide. I mean it. It looked like his eyes were going to roll out their sockets at any given moment. His facial expressions were one that made me feel uneasy. He was looking at us like he wanted to hurt us. You might think he's just hungry or having a bad day, but there's no way he chose this particular takeaway after staring at us all that time, and there was no mistaking him. My only guess is that he must have followed us. I mean, we weren't careful. We never checked behind us. Why would we? Several seconds go past and it feels like minutes. This guy is looking at me, and he just starts to angrily grind his teeth with the same mad look on his face. Honestly, he looked insane. It's at this point I look away and quietly tell my brothers that the guy from the park has followed us here and is over there staring at us. Now my youngest brother has never been one for subtlety, and he blurts out loudly, "What, the freak from the park?" Me and my other brother look at each other, eyes wide, and then back at my youngest brother. The confused look on his face, how he didn't realize how weird this whole situation actually was. We simultaneously turn our heads and look back at the man who is now standing, eyes mad, intensely focused on my little brother. His face was bright red, and the vein in his forehead was almost bursting from his skin. We all just looked back, unsure of what to do. It was at this second that our food was ready and brought over to our table. We thanked him, and I know what you're thinking. Maybe this guy was just waiting for a meal and got annoyed when my brother referred to him as a freak. But he was already staring. But that aside, it was confirmed when the cook asked him if he was ready to take his order, and the man just shook his head. We were all starting to feel a little on edge, but figured surely the safest thing to do would be to stay inside a public place. So we started eating, and I even got a nudge from my brother. I look, and the man is now stood towering over us looking down. Without warning, he slams a handful of plastic forks from the counter onto our table. At first we try and ignore it, but he starts to breathe heavily, almost hyperventilating. Being the oldest, I feel I should say something in my sternest voice, which of course wasn't very stern at all. I told him we were fine, and thank you, and I hoped he enjoyed his meal. Kill him with kindness, I thought. Dumb idea. Without warning, he spreads all the forks frantically over the table, grabs a handful, and shoves them in his mouth and starts chewing them. I didn't have words. The noise is disgusting, and the crunching and choking. I look around to see if anyone else is seeing this, but there isn't anyone but us, and the cooks are in the back preparing the food. It's just us and this lunatic. Blood starts pouring from his mouth, as he continues to churn these plastic forks, as he looks to my youngest brother and hisses. It's at this point we nope out of there and leave. We don't even take our food. Well, except my youngest brother, who I guess just wanted to leave after seeing. We didn't even take our food with us except for my youngest brother, who I guess just wanted to leave after seeing that, without even putting his plastic container down. We all quickly walk away, none of us talking. What could we say? We were speechless, but the look we gave each other was enough. Like, damn, did that really happen? Without warning, the man appeared from behind us, grabbed my youngest brother by the hand, and my blood turned to ice. I felt powerless. I felt paralyzed. He was so quiet. None of us heard him sneak up on us. We couldn't believe it. We'd looked behind us multiple times to make sure we weren't being followed. We were in shock he was there. He must have come through some side street or shortcut. Me and my brother just shot each other a panicked look, while my youngest brother struggled to set himself free. He hit him over the head with his food container, which was open, and of course did nothing. But as he pushed food into his eyes, it did give my brother and I a split second to do something, and I'll never forget it. Without thinking and without hesitation, my brother picked up a broken brick which lay in a pile next to a smashed up wall, and swung it at the man's head with some force. He instantly let go but didn't fall, and we all booked it out of there. And he chased us, growling like some wild animal. He almost gained on us at one point, his long legs carrying him further with each stride. He was carrying something in his hand, but we were running, and couldn't see it, not that any of us wanted to find out. Eventually we lost him, in a somewhat busy part of town, and then finally made it home. We tried to tell our mum, but of course she didn't believe us. Mums never do. I know this story may seem tame to most, but it freaked us out, not least my youngest brother. Poor kid. He still hasn't been back to that takeaway. None of us have. So much for £2 meal deals. Never mind, a small price to pay. I'm just glad we did stop there that day and not head straight home. See, our mum doesn't trust us with a key, so she often leaves the front door unlocked until we arrive. If he had followed us there, and he had forced his way in, or even noticed this, it could have been much worse. I shudder to think. I attend what some people call the most haunted college in Indiana, and me being a horror enthusiast, found it fit to attend this place in hopes that I see something. That was a very unconscious choice I made, because honestly, I didn't really want to see anything remotely paranormal. There's a legend here that there was a sister, as this is a Catholic school founded in 1840, who was extremely good at painting, and she would spend weeks on detail. Which is true, her paintings are everywhere in the school. So once she decided to do a self-portrait of herself, she did everything but the face. This is because she got sick and passed, leaving an unfinished portrait of this faceless nun. There's part of the legend that says a sister heard crying where the painting was, and when she looked in the room, there was the nun crying with no face. The chapel on campus even went as far as to doing a service dedicated to her, to supposedly make the sightings stop. Now, I honestly didn't believe this, but I can't lie and say it didn't make me want to attend the school more. I just didn't know her entire story when I applied. When I got to my dorm a few weeks in, I had my first encounter. I was in bed, but since my roommate and I like the room to be freezing, I woke up around 2 a.m. because I wanted to fetch a sweater. So I sat up, and in the corner of my room behind the door and in front of my fridge was this tall black figure. The only thing I could really make out was the shape of the top of her nun habit. I called my roommate's name a few times, hoping she'd answer, and fortunately she did. Kaylee, being a devout Catholic, didn't want to look, so I shined my phone light on it, but it was gone. I'd have thought it was just a shadow of my lamp or something, but even when I removed the light, the shape and vividness of the habit hadn't gone away, but it was gone. If that wasn't enough to scare me, I decided to listen to some good old Chris Tomlin to go to bed. YouTube wasn't on my side that night because I'd gotten an ad for The Nun right before it, which freaked me out. Because if you don't know, Chris Tomlin is a Christian singer. After that, I decided to just go to sleep after giving my mum a very teary phone call. And that's when I had my first experience with sleep paralysis at school. The first time it happened, I couldn't tell you where I was, but I remember there was this dark figure in the corner of my eye that my older brother later referred to as a shadow person. It lasted for about 10 minutes maybe. The second time I was clearly in my room and I could see Kaylee sleeping in her bed across from mine, but there was a person in our room. I was trying to call out to her, but for obvious reasons there was no sound for her to hear. The third and longest time I woke up in between two segments and saw the same thing in my dream when I was awake. Kaylee was sleeping in the same position she was in when I was paralyzed, and that same person was getting much closer to her. I can tell that it was her, the nun, but each time it loses its nun shape and becomes more blobby. A few things happened between the third and fourth encounter. The biggest and only one worth mentioning was my wall and the posters. I was told by a sister and a student that the faceless nun targets elementary majors, since she was an elementary major supposedly. She'd ran out of our school already, a girl 1 year ahead of me, and the student had been her roommate. She said that her posters would never stay on the wall after she left, and that things would be randomly moved. I didn't believe this, even though it freaked me out since Kaylee and I are both ed majors. But I just thought it had to do with our walls not being repainted or Kaylee moving my things. But the room had some suspicious dried dark handprints in 2 spots on our wall that made me nauseous to look at. This fourth time, I awoke somewhere between sleep paralysis, which added to the scare factor. I remember hearing trap music just playing in our room. Kaylee said, "Hey, do you hear that?" But I was turned towards the wall so she couldn't see my face, and that my eyes had to be open because I could see. I felt her touching me, almost rocking my body to get my attention, and I remember thinking, "Stop, I don't have a shirt on." It was still raining, but I could feel her moving me, and I was panicking because Kaylee was scared and I couldn't do anything to help her. So I woke up, or at least I thought I did, and Kaylee was sitting up and talking to me, but I knew it wasn't real because of the look on her face, and I asked where Kaylee was, and I blinked, and Kaylee was lying down again. Then my fuzzy pink blanket was on the floor, and it looked like someone was sitting with their arms on their knees, and I asked Kaylee what that was, and she said, "The ghost is under my bed," and the blanket fell, and something started talking under her bed, but I couldn't move or talk. It was like I had entered sleep paralysis again, which I was, but before that I was too, and I was able to talk to Kaylee in my dream? I don't know. This is very confusing. I remember trying to recite the Lord's Prayer, and I did, but I woke up again, this time in church, and I couldn't move. I was seeing Kaylee leaving church and talking to the priest wearing his white collar, but then she called him out for acting weird, and I kid you not, I think I saw the devil himself, and he told her to get the hell out of my church, and this time I woke up for real. I haven't even begun to analyze the fourth time, but I'm sharing it with you because I am at such a loss for words as to why I'm being targeted, and why I'm seeing it around Kaylee. If anyone has any scientific basis for this, please help me debunk it. I just want to be able to sleep at night. The paralysis has happened continually. There also may not be a paranormal connection to this, but honestly, it feels like that's what it is. So anyone able to come forward to offer me peace of mind would be extremely appreciated. This story was told to me by my mother. I was very young at the time and could barely walk. I was probably around 1, and my mother would take me out to the front yard in the middle of the night for me to do my business. It was one of those nights, and I and my mother were in the middle of the night when my mum saw an egg-shaped light flying towards us in the air. We lived in a village near mountains, and it gives me chills every time I remember this story. An egg or oval-shaped light flying towards us in extreme dead silence of the night. It came closer and closer until flashed into our faces like the flash of a photo camera and just vanished. We have never been able to find any explanation. The following event took place in the same location, but I was around 12 to 13 at the time. We had a huge shed in front of our rooms, which was supported by pillars at the front and was good for sleeping in rainy summer nights, as it's very hot where we lived at the time. This event took place during one of the winter nights and was told by both my parents the next morning. So I and my siblings were sleeping with my parents in one of the rooms when my father got up in the middle of the night and heard someone coming from the shed just outside the room. The noise sounded like someone's sigh, as if someone in deep fever or in extreme pain. At first, my father thought someone had broken in our house, so turned on his torch, but it went off as soon as he turned it on and would not switch back on. Main electricity wasn't working as power was turned off in the whole village, and my father tried to look around, but there was no one. If that was a djinn, it must have been a very scary one, due to the sound and the feeling of its presence. Hairs on my whole body stand till this day whenever I remember that moment. I don't know how my parents handled the situation that night. I hope no one ever faces what my parents faced then. Next to our house was our neighbor's house. Note that most of the houses in our village are built in the same style. Rooms and then sheds supported by pillars in front of the rooms, and then the yard. So our neighbor's house was similar to our house. No one lived there as they all lived in the city, but we kept the house keys just in case. My younger brother used to play cricket with his friends in there, all aged between 7 and 10. One day as they were playing cricket as usual, when the ball went inside the shed and stopped next to a room door, when one of the boys went to go get the ball, and as soon as he got close to the room, sees knocking in the room door from inside. No one lived in the house as mentioned before. I saw all the kids screaming and running out of the house. The house is haunted, by the way, and the kids never played there after this incident. This story was told by a colleague of mine from my previous workplace. He was a Hindu, and this is what he said. One of the relatives was an artisan jewelry maker. He used to make artificial jewelry products at his house during the night and would sell them in the morning. One day I received a call about the same relative saying he had not returned home for 2 days. So I, along with a few other people, went out to search for him. They found his body washed away near a riverbank. We prepared the funeral, and after the funeral I stayed the night with his family. At some point during the night, I woke up and heard the sound of a very small hammer used by the deceased to make jewelry, as if someone was still crafting. I'm a grown man, but was very scared. I pretended to be asleep and returned home the next day, and have never been there since. This happened when I was a lot younger, and sometimes I still think about it. At the time, I was around 10 years old, going to school, in Osaka, Japan. I lived in America, but every summer my mum would take my younger sister and I to Japan to see her mother and make us go to school, since Japanese schools go on until late July before their summer break. In the mornings, I would walk to school with my sister, and everything was usually okay. Although we'd get the occasional odd stare, since despite being half Japanese, in a smaller town like that, where no tourists ever come, we stuck out like a sore thumb. However, once school was over, I usually was unable to walk home with my sister because of after-school clubs and the clubs ending at different times. At least, I had a few friends who could walk me home, however, and gave me company, so I rarely was ever alone. But one day, I decided I didn't want to stay for my club, and that I just wanted to go home early and play some Wii. I knew my mum wouldn't mind, since I had decided to join a not-too-important club called Cooking Club. My friends, however, had more obligation than I did, since they actually lived in Japan and went for the whole school year, unlike me, and could not accompany me home. My walk home started out fine, but rather quickly my 10-year-old self felt that something was off. There was a man in a baseball cap, wearing one of those cold masks, with baggy clothes following me. He was still a fair distance away from me too, so since I was a pretty naive kid, I shrugged it off and kept walking. But pretty soon after, I heard footsteps pretty close behind me now. I figured it was a different person, but being curious, I turned my head to see the same man closing the distance between us fairly quickly. I remember starting to feel pretty nervous at that point. A quick point here before I continue. In the town I was at, there are lots of small alleys and streets that are all connected, so you can take plenty of wrong turns and still end up home as long as you have a decent idea of where your house is. My brain does not function well at all when I'm nervous or stressed, so instinctively I turned into a small alleyway, which was honestly the dumbest thing I could have done. But at the time I figured that the man would keep walking and that would resolve all of this. But instead, he turned into the alleyway as well. At this point I started fast walking, but didn't want to straight up run since I still wasn't 100% sure he was following me, and running would come off as kind of rude if the man wasn't following me. I began making random turns into streets and narrow alleys that I had never stepped foot into before, hoping that the man wouldn't follow me. Surely he was just an innocent man trying to get somewhere. However, even my dumb 10-year-old brain knew that after the 5th or 6th time I had made a random turn with the man still following me, that I was in danger. At the time, I was in a narrow alleyway with walls that were way taller than I was, so I couldn't see what was up ahead or next to me. I decided I should start running, not thinking that a grown man would be faster than me. I also was weighed down by my backpack and water bottle, so I can only imagine how slow I was. I could hear his footsteps much louder against the asphalt, and I was beyond scared at this point. I was sure I was going to get kidnapped and then murdered. I remember running with everything I had, to the point I was afraid I would literally run myself into the ground. But the alleyway went out into a street I recognized, where there was a supermarket, and thankfully several people were either walking or on their bicycles. I slowed down immediately. I was a self-conscious kid and didn't want to attract more attention to myself than my foreign looks already were. I turned around once more to see the man who was simply standing there for a few moments before walking in the direction of the supermarket. But I knew there was no way that was his destination this whole time. I had taken the weirdest route and there were much more direct ways he could have used if he had wanted to go there. I told my mum, who contacted the school. I got in trouble for deciding to go home alone that day, and afterwards, a teacher always made sure there was at least one kid with me when I made my way home. This story happened back in my freshman year of high school. It was my second day in that school, and I was still getting used to how big my school was and how far away it was from my house. The first time I went to my school was for freshman orientation with my mother. The first period of the day, I got lost and ended up on the wrong side of the school. After correcting my mistake, I went on throughout the day as normally as I possibly could. It was around the beginning of 8th period, which was my last period of the day, when I ran into my best friend. We caught up a bit, when I said I'll continue our chat via messaging, and he said alright and hurried to his class as I hurried to mine. During our chat, he told me his schedule was a 2 to 9 meeting, meaning he started classes at 8:10 a.m. and dismissed at 2:50. My schedule was 1 to 8. I started at 7:10 a.m. and dismissed at 2. Once I was dismissed from school, I messaged him telling him I was waiting for him to go home, since we go home in the same direction. I get off 4 stops before him, and he said, "Sure, sounds good." I waited about an hour, and when the bell rang, I looked everywhere for him. I looked left and right and left again, but couldn't find him. So I continued until everyone had already left the front of the school entrance. I got confused and worried and messaged him again asking where he was. He replied 5 minutes later saying he was 20 minutes away from his house. His mother had come to pick him up. Not knowing what to do, I just left the school area and walked towards my bus stop. Except I was still new to the neighborhood and still did not know the exact block my bus stopped at. It was a public bus and not one of those yellow school buses. And since I didn't know the block of my bus stop, I ended up walking past it without knowing. I continued to walk around aimlessly until my senses returned to me and I snapped back to reality. Me being the dumbass I was, I continued to walk down a neighborhood I didn't know. The streets were relatively empty, except when I looked across the street and saw another kid. I thought, oh okay, there's someone else here. He was under a tree, so I couldn't really see his face, but I knew we made eye contact. I sighed in relief, because at least I wasn't the only one in the streets. I walked about 15 blocks in total and saw that the dude was still behind me, but across the street. I thought nothing of it at first, because maybe he lives around here. But soon I started to get a weird feeling and a weird vibe from the dude. So, in an attempt to see if I was just being paranoid, I walked across the street and down near the park. I didn't walk into the park, I just stood at the corner of the crosswalk. I waited there for 2 to 3 minutes, all the while pretending to be texting a friend. I looked up and saw the creepy dude. Now that he wasn't in the shade anymore, I kind of got his face better. This dude looked like he was a year or 2 older than me. At this point, I was panicking, so I pretended to call my mum to see if he'd leave me alone. He didn't. He was still standing there across the street with a weird and unsettling smirk on his face. The moment that smirk appeared on his face, a huge red flag was waving in my head and telling me to avoid that guy at all costs. I nervously walked past him, and he was trailing behind me, still across from the street. Then he crossed the street, so we'd be on the same block. I ran like my life depended on it, which it very well may have done, and I was out of breath very quickly. I look over my shoulder and he was gaining on me. He had this crazed look in his eyes, like I was his prey. I turned the corner and with this sudden burst of energy ran into the nearest shop, a pharmacy, and hid behind an aisle and peeked out from behind a shelf of school supplies. Out the display window, I could see him running up to the corner and looking around for me. The corner was one of those four-way intersections. I could have run up, left, and/or right. He looked around frantically, and with a few seconds left at the traffic light, he decided to continue running up. I waited for about 2 minutes until I came out my hiding spot. I didn't even remember thanking the shop owners for letting me hide there, but left and didn't look back. I looked at my phone and saw that it was almost 6:30. My phone was on 10% and I was completely lost without a doubt. I didn't want to go back down the block I just ran from, in fear that he might back down to look for me. So I turned left and continued down the block until I saw my school. I walked carefully and looked at each block until I saw my bus stop sign. I sighed in relief and waited for the bus. The scary thing is that I don't remember his face, his ethnicity, or anything. I took a good look at his face during the moment, but to this day I'm still unsure if I'd be able to identify him. He could have walked past me in the halls at school or outside in the street, and I'd have been none the wiser. And don't worry, I'm not the dumb, naive little girl I was back then. Now I know that if I'm ever in danger, I will call someone. I should let the store owners know next time too. But at the time, the owners were talking to an elderly woman, so I didn't want to seem rude. And one last thing. The block with the pharmacy and other stores ended up being the block where my new best friend actually lives. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago, when I used to work in a warehouse which was a bit old, as I had seen goods and documents from the 1960s to 80s there. The warehouse had a basement and a first floor, and the lighting was not very good. All floors could only be accessed through a cargo/elevator or lift, as the only narrow staircase was kept locked at all times. It was a very silent and creepy place. There was a DVD player with 2 speakers on top near the lift doors in the basement, which had been there a while, but they were there. One day I was waiting for the lift in the basement as my colleagues were sending some goods down, which then I would unload in the basement, when suddenly one of the speakers started shaking violently, almost dancing, and then fell on its side, and I felt there was something else besides me in the basement. Another event took place in a room in my house. Few of my family members complained about a disturbance in one particular room. One day we found sugar scattered all over the floor in that room. A few days later, as soon as I entered the room, I felt a strong wind that went past my left, as if someone had just ran past me so close I could sense the feeling of being on my skin. I turned around, but there was nothing in the room. The feeling of someone's presence from a while ago was gone. Whatever it was had left the room upon me walking in. Some other things also happened, like knocks on cupboards/wardrobes and noises of dishes being messed with from the kitchen, but it never scared or hurt any of us. This story was told to us by our very pious elders, who's nearly 100 years old. He lives in a village in the mountains in northern Pakistan. His house is located next to a graveyard, or in other words, his gate opens into the graveyard. This is what he said: that he used to chop medium-sized trees up in the mountain, load them on a donkey, and bring them down to the village to sell. So there he was in the middle of the mountain one day when he spotted a man walking just a bit far behind him. He had snow-white, cottonish beard, and was wearing white clothes, and his head was covered with a white piece of cloth like the Arabic turban. He'd never seen a man like that, and he wasn't a man. He was walking away, and then faded into thin air. His body was shaken by that incident, and fear overcame him. So then he prayed to see the man again, and a few years after the incident, he was deep in his sleep in the middle of the night, and had a dream that someone was banging very hard on his house gate. He suddenly woke up, and it turns out someone was banging on his gate. He hesitated to walk across the yard and open it, as it was the middle of the night or very early in the morning. What he saw was the same man walking away from the gate, in all white. He wanted to speak but couldn't. He eventually faded, and that was the last time he saw him. He doesn't know who or what that was. One of our neighbors, who was an old lady, used to live alone in her haunted house, and another neighbor's daughter, aged 20, used to sleep over with her in case the old lady might need help at night, as she was an old lady, and this is what the old lady told us one day. The other night she was waiting for the girl when she walked from the main gate. She greeted her, but she didn't reply and walked straight into the house, and then into the room where they slept. She thought she might have been tired from working all day, and that's why she didn't talk, and went straight into the room to sleep. As she was thinking about the girl, she walks in again from the main gate. The lady got confused. She didn't know what to say, but this time she spoke. Who was the first girl that had walked in and went straight to the room? They both went together to check, but as you can imagine, there was no one. I had a friend called Alicia. My town is mostly quiet. Not much happens around here, so when I'm walking around I don't feel like I'm in any danger. My town park has a section to the side which has hedges in the shape of a square, just over 1 meter high with some gravel. A statue and 2 benches facing each other about 10+ meters away from each other. So because it has a statue, it's called the Memorial Park. Most dog walkers don't go in that area because a lot of people sit there and there isn't much room to throw a ball. Not to mention, there was a huge field-size area for dog walkers and anyone else to go just behind us. Me and my friend just sat on a bench talking when this old guy with a dog trailing behind him comes into the memorial area. I must mention that me and my friend were sat in that area because I, at the time, was deathly afraid of large dogs, so I had my eye on him. The second he walked in there, he starts throwing the ball for his dog to chase. Nothing too strange yet, apart from the fact he kept staring me down, and when we made eye contact, didn't look away. My friend looked over to him, then back to me, and each time the ball is thrown, it got closer and closer to me. Both the man and my friend can both see me visibly flinch and tense every time the dog runs to the ball. My friend took one last look at the man and suggested we leave. Now, there is one entrance/exit to the Memorial Park area. We didn't want to walk past him because he was stood next to the exit, so we chose to leave through the gap in the hedges in the back, which was made from so many people forcing their way through that area. The guy follows us through the gap at a distance. Seeing as it was almost time to go home, me and my friend start heading towards the town center. The guy and his dog, who was now on a lead in front of us, I clearly remember my friend taking quick looks at the guy as we walked, and her saying in hurried whispers that he was staring at me. We walked through the town center and walked to the bottom of the road where me and my friend would have to part ways. We stopped to talk about what I saw out the corner of my eye, and the man's pace visibly slowed. At this point, we had been walking around 10 to 15 minutes. He walked past us slowly and looked at me in the eyes and then turned and started walking up the road. I was going to have to walk down it, and my friend insisted she would walk me home just to be safe, and because her curfew was later than mine, she was lucky in that regard and would help me out. He walked not far in front of us the whole walk to my house, his head only occasionally turning to look back at us every few minutes. Me and my friend stood on my doorstep and spoke while he walked a little further down the road. Then he turned in the direction of my house, then got out his phone and started doing something on it. I watched as my friend walked away on a different road from the man to make sure he didn't follow her. Once she was out of sight, I rushed into my house and upstairs into the bathroom. I opened the window slightly and watched the man take one last look at my house and then walk away. The scary thing is, because it was almost 3 years ago, I can't remember what his face looks like. So if I did see him again, who knows if I would recognize him. I'm just glad he hasn't come stalking my house, at least as far as I'm aware. I'm from a very small, very rural town with around 200 people, 25 miles from the nearest bigger town. Somehow, we have an elementary school, and when I was going there, it was K-8. The entire time I went to school there, I felt as if I were being watched. Going to the high school in the next town solidified that something was off about that building, as the feeling went away entirely. Everything that happened was specifically centered around the girls' bathroom and the gym. I'm just going to kind of list these by what grade they happened to me in. While I was in 1st and 2nd grade, handprints would appear on the mirror in the girls' bathroom. Now obviously kids' handprints, but higher up than any of us in the class could reach. No one would own up to it, but it could be explained as an older kid, not wanting to get in trouble for making a mess. As far as I remember, however, some of them would appear first thing in the morning, before any kids had arrived and after the bathrooms had been cleaned the previous evening. In 3rd grade, I went into the girls' bathroom and went into the middle stall. The other two were open and empty, yet once I sat down on the toilet, I saw shoes in the next stall next to mine and got chills down my spine. I left the bathroom as quickly as I could. I should also mention that the stall I was in, I saw shoes and also had the mirror on the other side of it. In 4th grade, I saw a tall blonde girl standing on the bench behind me in the mirror. I turned around and she wasn't there. When I turned back to the mirror, she was gone. In 6th grade, I was in the balcony of the gym with some friends after basketball practice. In one corner of the gym, there was paper posted with recess rules. The paper definitely didn't face of its own accord. Something grabbed onto it and pulled it entirely off the wall. I remember the room going cold, and we pretty much booked it out of there and went our separate ways. In 7th grade, I got my first cell phone. The computer lab is separate from the school, and its porch was a common hangout spot for kids in town after school and during the summer. We were screwing around with the negative setting on my new phone, taking pictures in the back of the school. The back door is right next to the entrance to the previously mentioned corner of the gym. The doors have windows in the top half, and in one of the pictures there was an obvious head in the corner of the windows. In the pictures taken before and after, there was nothing there. Not sure if it had anything to do with the negative setting, but I'm not sure we would have noticed it without it. No one was in the building. It was probably around July, but I broke that phone beyond retrieving them. In 8th grade, I finally asked my mum if she thought the school could be haunted, as she is not from around here. She suggested that I ask my aunt, who has lived here all her life. I asked my aunt straight up if she thought the school was haunted, and immediately said, "Well, you know your cousin died in there, right?" I told her I'd heard a story of a girl who collapsed and died during PE a long time ago. In the corner of the gym, there were a few weird things that happened. My aunt told me that was my cousin Lisa. She was 11 when she died of a heart condition no one was aware of. My aunt was 17 at the time, and I described the girl I saw in the bathroom years before. Tall, with shoulder-length, straight hair. According to my aunt, that described her almost perfectly. It explained, at least to me, why I had seen these things throughout the years, and only ever in the girls' bathroom and the gym. Why I had felt like I was being watched, but never in a malevolent way. Why I felt an immense sense of relief upon going to high school, because I didn't have to look over my shoulder all the time and fear I would see something that wasn't meant to be there. It gave me some closure, some explanation, and made me less fearful of the school. I still get a chill down my spine when I go in though. This story took place in a town in Iraq. It was told to me by my father. My family's neighbors were two brothers who lived with their sister, and one day they came to my father seeking help. Apparently their sister had disappeared and they couldn't find her. The father helped them look for her, and they searched everywhere, including police stations and hospitals, but they couldn't find her. Eventually they got really desperate and started visiting seers. None of them helped as expected. They'd take the money and give no valuable information. They felt hopeless until a man visited them offering his help. He asked for no money, but he said he needed a girl or boy who hadn't hit puberty for his ritual. So my father and the two brothers asked their one neighbor who happened to have a little girl for help. Everyone, including my father, two brothers and the seer and the little girl's parents, gathered in one room. The man started blindfolding the child, taking out 2 cards with words in an unknown language written on them, and reading them aloud. He asked the child to open her eyes and describe what she saw while blindfolded. The girl said she was in front of a forest and could see a castle with 2 tall beings standing guard. The man tells her to not be afraid and go inside, because the guards wouldn't say anything to her. She enters the castle and sees a man with red eyes sitting on a chair. The seer tells her to ask the man with the red eyes about the missing woman, but she says that he won't answer. He just turns his face away. The seer then puts his hand near the girl's head and crosses her fingers and says, "Tell me or I'll burn you." The girl starts perfectly describing the incident, how the woman was assaulted by a thief and then hospitalized afterwards. They found the woman in the same hospital the girl mentioned, and everything she said was confirmed to be true. And the seer? My father doesn't know what happened to him. I don't think they ever heard from him again. The year was 2011. I was 17, and I was a typical high school student during the last year of school. I studied hard and mostly cared about the finals, but also secretly longed for some overwhelming romantic love in my life. My high school was affiliated with the university, so every autumn we had students who came to do their teaching internships or practice. It usually lasted 2 or 3 months, depending on the subject they taught, and usually they were female interns who came. This year was an exception. A new intern was an extremely good-looking guy, and it was not me, blind with love, who thought so. Later I found out he worked as a male model in our city, who was around 25 and taught maths and had this geeky charm. Even though he didn't teach in my class, at least half of the girls there had a crush on him, and it is not an exaggeration to say that a fair share of the school got crazy. It was no exception, of course, so I, every time I saw him in the corridors, smiled and tried to catch his eye, because in my head he looked like a perfect Prince Charming, and with every day I was more and more into him. I thought he also may have liked me, but you can never be sure with these matters until something happens. And something happened, although I wish it never did. He found me on social media and wrote me a message from an empty profile saying that he'd been watching me and that I'm beautiful and that he wanted to get to know me. Romantic, right? I couldn't believe my eyes when I got it. It was a dream come true. He asked me a whole bunch of different questions, ranging from my favorite movie to where I live, and it turned out that we lived nearby. In the first evening, we chatted all night, and he even suggested doing a romantic thing as to turn the lights on and off in the window so that we could see each other. He was finishing his practice in our school at the time, so he called me for a date after it. I agreed, but decided to slow down and to communicate only via social media, as I was super shy in real life and needed time to adapt. That's when it started to get creepy. First, he started to tell me that I was meant for him, and there was no way around it, and he felt it the first time he saw me. But judging from my answers to his questions, he understood that I did not behave correctly and that I needed guidance. I wanted a career. I wanted to study in the big city, while a woman should care for her man and her family only. So I should stay in my hometown with him, was what he expected. His logic was that he was my fate, and our meeting had happened with purpose. So what else to look for in the world? He offered me his educational services through some religious stories he sent to me through abstracts from the Bible that I began to receive daily from the second day after we met. He started to get on my nerves. I didn't like him anywhere near as much anymore, but only after the next creepy thing did I become truly concerned. In 3 or 4 days since we had met, he came over to my house and asked the concierge the number of my flat, since after the first evening he knew that I lived on the top floor and tried to get into it. Fortunately, she did not let him. He wrote a message to me that he wanted to do a surprise for me and perhaps meet my parents. This was when I understood that this is not romantic and actually abnormal. I told him I needed a break from our communication and blocked him on social media. He didn't want to take a break, and he started to follow me on my way from school to home. As he said, to talk and to clarify that he only wanted good for me, which was exceptionally creepy. And while the first day he followed me to the bus stop, further down the line, he started to follow me until my very home. Luckily, I told my friends about it, and they went with me to prevent him from doing so. All that seemed to infuriate him more. At some point down the line, he managed to track my phone number, and during his last days in school, I would receive messages like, "I'm in the school building, run and hide. I imagine you're all so scared hiding in the girls' bathroom while I'm here." Then, the peak of the story was when I came back home from school, and I had 3 days break from his attempts to talk to me. And the concierge told me that the guy came again and left a box for me. I didn't know what to do with it, so I brought it home, and he wrote me an SMS that if I open the box, he will leave me alone. I decided to throw it away after I peeked inside and saw that there were some chocolates and a treat for my dog. But at that point, I did not exclude the fact that it could be unsafe. After all of this, I finally told my mum about this mess, because before that, she was only acutely aware of the romantic side of the story. She opted to interfere immediately once she got the details. She took his phone number, called him, and said that if he didn't leave me alone, she would be informing the school administration about his actions, and he would have problems at the university with both the practice and his ethics principles in general. I would love to say that he disappeared forever after that, but no. This all was happening in March, and when he graduated in June, he started writing and tried to stalk me again, judging from reports by my grandmother. But this time he could not. I got accepted to a big city university and moved there soon enough. So, creepy intern guy, when I come to my hometown for a visit, I hope we never meet again. I'm a filmmaker. I love making short films, and a goal of mine is to be creating indie feature films and owning my own production company. I love the film industry, but for some reason I always tend to be drawn to horror. Perhaps it's my interest in the unknown. A few weeks ago I was getting out some food, I walked past Salvation Army store, which, for those of you who don't know, they sell used items for very cheap that people donate to them. Besides the store was a small section where they toss out stuff they cannot sell. I decided to look inside and see if there's anything worth picking up. And there was a super creepy toy doll. Now most people would not want to take creepy dolls home with them. But not me. I thought it would make a great prop for a short horror. So I threw it in the trunk of my car. Fast forward 2 weeks, I've made my short film, but decided to keep it, as it might be worth something when I get famous. A few days pass, it's 3 a.m, and I'm busy writing a script for a potential short film. My wife is in bed, and with the exception of my PC monitor, there's no other light on. In the middle of writing, I hear a doorknob turn, and a door open behind me. I look back to see my walk-in closet door all the way open. Now I'm 100% positive that it opened by itself because we never leave the door open. I get a strange feeling in my gut, but I quickly ignore it and get back to writing. I wasn't scared, but nothing like this has ever happened to me. As a kid, I used to turn off all the lights in my basement, grab a flashlight, and go ghost hunting. My sister and cousin, who I forced to come with me, thought I was crazy. The next day I was just cleaning around the house, and I brought my laundry to my room. When I tried to open the door to my walk-in closet, it was locked. I didn't even know that it could get locked. It stayed locked until the morning after, and that very night at 3 a.m, I was playing some video games when I heard a click behind me. The bathroom light turned on by itself. I'm 100% sure that it was off before. The strange feeling I had 2 nights ago had returned. Just this morning as I was driving to work, I felt a hand grasp my shoulder and no one else was in the car. Now I'm not sure what is the cause of all this, and I don't want to speculate, but I will update if anything else happens. I don't want to know if this creepy doll is haunting us. I lived quite close to my school in primary, so my older sister and I would walk home because my parents worked. My sister is 5 years older than me, so my parents trusted her enough to leave us home alone instead of going to after-school care. One day when I was in 3rd grade, I was asked by my teacher to stay back at the end of school. I told my sister, and she said she would just go home and wait there. I should also mention that the way from home from school was pretty much along a main road, and it should have been fine. I head back to my classroom and start talking with the teacher. At this point, it was nearly 5. I'm only about halfway home when I notice the white pickup following me. I was only about 7, mind you, and you start being taught stranger danger and stuff like that. So it was still pretty fresh in my mind. The pickup gave off suspicious vibes, and the street felt empty. I remember it still being bright out, but this pickup was the only car on the road. Worse still, it wasn't even on the road. It was on the side, moving very slowly behind me. At this point, it was a red alarm in my young mind, as even then I was pretty cautious of everything. I looked back again, and this time I think whoever it was knew I was aware of them. This was bad, because I think they panicked and were driving a little quicker now to close the gap. I was also getting more panicked too. Then I remember thinking there's a path between the next houses. It leads to the back of other people's homes, and then to the street next to mine. I walk a little faster, and I guess they noticed too. I remember them speeding up a little bit, but still keeping a gap. I quickly turn down between the houses and start running as soon as I think I'm out of their sight. I hear the pickup go faster and then come to a stop. By now I've turned the corner and hid so they couldn't see me. I hear the doors swing open, and I just hoped they wouldn't follow. I hear someone step on the grass, They were following, and I was panicking. Just then a voice says that they should just leave and forget about it. They speed away, and I walk the rest of the way home. Now, you might be thinking, what made me think of this just now? Well, a while ago, I heard my parents talking about some pretty dark stuff that was shut down on the internet, out of the Gold Coast in Queensland. I step in to ask what they were talking about, and they said that when I was a kid, it came out on the news that the police had taken down a huge CP website. I then went and searched this up, and turns out that the guy in charge of the website ran it out of the suburb I lived in. I got chills reading the article. Remembering back, this all happened 2 years after the van incident. 29 kids were saved from abuse that were featured on that website. It just really gives me the chills to think that maybe the guy in the pickup truck was one of them. My younger years were spent moving from place to place, chasing whatever work my father could find. It never bothered us much, because we still had each other as a constant. We moved to this one small town in the middle of central Louisiana. It was such a small, isolated town that they confused my northern accent with a speech impediment, as they had never encountered an accent other than their own. But the town was beautiful, with plenty of old-fashioned buildings and very kind and friendly people. But it was the school that would drive fear into me. My first day there, and I was walking down the hall to where my class was. I was excited to be there, hoping to make some friends before moving on to the next town and the next job. However, I noticed something very odd as I made my way down the hall. I could feel regular bumps in the floor, but I could see with my eyes that the floor was actually flat. But I could feel them. I could feel something else, something I was familiar with. Could it be the presence of the dead? I had always been able to connect to the dead well. I could feel them in my bones, and that is why, and still is why, I could never go to a graveyard. The feeling of being surrounded with that many lost souls would drive me towards a complete breakdown. So when I felt them under my feet, under that plain checkerboard floor tile, I knew I was in for a ride. All day, every day, I would see flashes of movement out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes it would just be a simple shadow. Other times I would see them as clearly as if they were alive. Some were pristine. Others trapped in the glory after effects of whatever violent death they had suffered. But it was more than just seeing them. I was used to that. It was their chatter, the non-stop buzz of voices that followed me around the school. I struggled every day to ignore them and often fell back on prayer just for a few moments of peace, but they always returned. The one event that cemented it all in place was during a tornado drill. Whether by design or fortunate accident, the lights in the school went out as soon as the teachers had us in the hallway, where we were supposedly going to be safe during the bad weather. I lifted my head up and looked around, and they were there. The souls. Some no different than the living, but others were mutilated messes. Terrified, I buried my head between my arms and didn't move until the lights returned. I would never see them like that again, but the image stuck with me to this day. After leaving the town, I found out the school had been built on a graveyard, one that spanned back nearly 200 years. Everyone from innocent children to hard-working farmers and bloodthirsty cultists were buried in the ground under my feet. I was glad I was only there for a few months, and thankfully didn't cultivate any friendships that would make me want to return. I was glad to be away from that place, and glad that I never encountered another school like that again. I moved to the UK with my brother about 4 years ago, who had moved in only 2 months before me, and we used to share a room in a shared house. Since the day I had moved in, I used to have very scary nightmares and would scream whilst asleep. One morning when I woke up, my brother asked me if I had experienced sleep paralysis that night, and I asked him, "How do you know?" He replied, "Because I did too." That was really shocking because there was something in the room playing tricks on both of us. This happened after a few months, and I and my brother happened to be on the same security shift on the same night in the middle of the fields, which could only be accessed through a dirt road since there was a solar farm being built and we had to take care of it. It was during the afternoon, and my brother fell asleep inside the cabin while I kept an eye outside, and what I saw was a white car that just sped on the dirt road, causing dust to fly everywhere, and I immediately came out of the cabin to see that there was nothing, so I brushed it off as my imagination. A little while later, when my brother woke up, he said that he had just had a dream about seeing a white car speeding on that road. That was another surprise. About a year later, my brother was doing nightly security with one of his friends on shift with him in the middle of nowhere, down south, and this is what he told me/my family. We were doing security shift in the middle of fields, far away from the city, and we were cooking ourselves some food on a camping gas stove out in the open. It was already dark, and there were no other human beings apart from us two, when suddenly we heard someone talking just a few yards away from us. My friend asked me if I had heard it, and I sure had, but for his sake I denied hearing anything, trying not to scare him, as there were no other human beings apart from us. The next event took place about a month or two ago, when I was on a security shift on a construction site, sitting inside a welfare cabin playing on my phone. It is my habit to close all the doors and windows due to the cold and having the heat on full. That particular site has direct power, not a generator. It had already been a few hours since the workers had left, and it was already dark. So there I am sitting in the cabin for more or less 2 hours, and someone's safety helmet/hard hat just flew off the wall hanger hook near the cabin door and fell about a meter away from the wall itself. I panicked, as it was a sudden surprise, and as I mentioned earlier that all doors and windows were closed and the power is direct, so no generator shaking, and it sat there for 2 hours before it flew off the wall hanger hook. This particular experience happened when I was in 5th grade. My 5th grade teacher decided to have all of us students paint ceramic figurines as Christmas gifts for our parents, and so she decided to do this project in the old band hall above our gym. Our elementary school, at the time, was the high school back in the 1930s, and the band hall had been unused for many years. So our first day doing the project, she led us up to this dark staircase, and when she reached the top, she flipped the light over the staircase, and we turned and faced this long hallway lined with doors, some open, some closed. And this hallway was the only way to the main room, where she decided to do our painting. I immediately felt uneasy, like I was being watched down this long hallway, and I would peer into the rooms where the doors had been left unopened. I couldn't see much because they were pitch black, and a shiver went down my spine. Once I got to the main room, our teacher got us settled in, and we chose our figurines to paint. I chose a planter in the shape of a cat. My plan was to paint it all black with blue eyes and a pink nose. Now my mum has painted ceramic figures my whole life, and taught me, so I finished my figurine before my classmates finished theirs. My teacher tasked me with refilling old cans with water for my classmates. The room with the sink was at the end of the hall to the left. I'm standing in the sink, cleaning out the cans and refilling water, when, behind me, is a door that leads to what I'm assuming was the old band director's office, and I hear several knocks on the door behind me, and I slowly turn the knob with a shaking hand. The room is empty, but the other door on the other side of the room was open, and I could see the top of the staircase. I roll my eyes to think my classmates were playing some kind of practical joke, so I carry the water cans into the main room, put the cans in the tables, and start collecting the others that needed to be cleaned and refilled. On my way out to the room, I stopped and asked my teacher if anyone has left the room. She looked at me puzzled and said, "No, why do you ask?" "I thought I heard someone knocking a door back there," I said. My teacher giggles a little, pats my shoulder. "It's an old building. An old building's creak. I'm sure it was nothing," she said. And I walk back to the room with the sink. I start washing the cans in soapy water, and one was lying on its side on the counter next to me, all by itself. And then it began rolling back and forth, like someone was playing with it, and would roll it really close to the edge but then back again. I was frozen with fear, and then it stopped as fast as it started. Then there was a loud bang on the window next to me. I jumped and looked out the window, but we were on the second floor. The only way there could have been a bang on the window was if someone had thrown something at it, but there was no one out there. I hurried and filled the cans and walked very fast to the main room with my heart pounding. A week later we were in the classroom, my previous experiences almost forgotten. I had finished my classwork and was reading my book. My teacher was touching up some of the figurines, and she called my name and I went up to her. "Could you go into the band hall and get the peach-colored paint?" she asked. My heart started pounding. Can Chris go with me?" "You're the only one who's done the classwork." She hands me the key and I walk over to the gym and the door that led to the creepy old band hall. I just stood there terrified, but being a kid I wasn't about to not do something my teacher asked me for. So I unlocked the door and made my way up the dark staircase and cursed the person who so brilliantly decided to put the light switch at the very top and not the bottom where I was standing. I took a deep, steaming breath and ran up as fast as I could and flipped on the light switch, and then I'm faced with the dark, creepy hallway that lined the doors. I was breathing hard from running up the stairs, and my heart was pounding in my chest with fear. So I decided to make a mad dash down the hallway and into the main room where we had been painting just the week before. I found the paint my teacher requested, and I noticed all the shades hanging in front of the window were moving back and forth, but there wasn't any air in the room, and the windows weren't open. And then I heard moaning that quickly turned to laughing, and I ran for it. Down the hall, down the stairs, I flew out the door to the bottom of the stairs and slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. I noticed in my haste I didn't turn off the stairwell light, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to go back to turn it off. Till this day I remember that old terrifying band hall, and it being my most terrifying paranormal experience to date. It is to be understood that jinns are beings that have different types of power. Some can fly, some shapeshift. They can see us, but we could not see them unless they show themselves to us. They're beings created from a smokeless fire, apparently. So anyway, I was in Pakistan and visiting family that live in a small village on the outskirts of the city. There's a woman living here who's a bit crazy. I mean, stare at her and she will throw stones at you crazy. I was minding my own business when I noticed her looking at me. This really freaked me out. The next day, it was really raining hard in the middle of summer. It was 1 a.m. and me and my cousin are on the roof and we hear something. We look below and see a woman, that woman, walking across the street, talking to herself loudly, holding a candle. The candle flame was blue and the rain could not extinguish the flame. We ran inside and all prayed. The next day we went to speak to the local imam or priest, and he said that he suspects that she is possessed, but she wasn't harming anyone and there was no proof supporting our claim. We told my uncle what happened. He got annoyed and physically dragged me to her home. It was so dark and creepy. He asked her about the night, and she said she had no idea what I was talking about, and that kids have the wildest imaginations. As we were leaving, she said to me, "Poor Jimmy." I didn't really understand it. We go back home to England, and then I find out my cat Jimmy died. On the same day, she said, "Poor Jimmy," to me. I work night shifts at a woman's shelter that is about a 30-minute commute away from my apartment. I take the metro every night to work and every morning from work. The closest metro station being situated a 5-minute walk from my apartment. My work is situated in the downtown area of the city that I currently reside in while I live in the neighborhood that has a reputation of being filled with alcoholics and drug addicts. I have had no encounters worth mentioning in either places until now. I was walking towards the metro station last night after saying goodbye to my boyfriend who was heading home after spending the evening with me. I think it's worth mentioning that my boyfriend drives to and from my place every Tuesday and Thursday, and I work from Sunday to Wednesday, meaning that I was heading to work when this happened. I was walking towards the metro station when a man suddenly appeared out of nowhere on the street corner across from the metro station and grabbed me by the arm. This happened to be on the only street corner from my apartment to the metro station that you cannot see anything on the street perpendicular to the one I was on until you got onto the street corner. So I'm getting onto the street corner. The metro station is across from me, and I am getting ready to cross the street as there was a green light when the man appeared out of nowhere and grabbed me by the arm. I freeze for a second before noticing that he is reaching over my body to grab my other arm, but before he could do that, I reacted and elbowed him in the stomach. I guess he didn't expect a quick reaction because he quickly let go. After he let go, I sprinted across the street and ran into the metro station. The metro station has 2 entrances that are parallel to one and another. Both are facing the turnstiles that access the metro downstairs. I had noticed from the corner of my eye that the guy had followed me, and before he got inside, I headed to the other exit, ran around the station, and headed back towards my apartment. Since I live in the Great White North, and it had been snowing all day, I was hoping that my boyfriend had not left yet, as he would have to take the snow off his car before leaving. Luckily, he did not, and he ended up driving me to work. We also met a cop car as we were about to turn on the street to get to the highway, so we stopped and reported the guy. The cops took down my information and what I could remember of his description, and they promised to go check it out and do a few rounds around the metro station. I don't know what that guy's intentions were, but I hope I never encounter that guy ever again. I'm from a religious family, but from a young age have been skeptical and a critic of religion in general. This singular experience has been enough for me to wonder whether there really is a God, or perhaps more to this world than we think. I was maybe 11 years old at the time. It was midday and mainline electricity had just come back on, and my father had asked me to turn the generators off, which were located on the 3rd floor of the house. I walk up the stairs, thinking about the dinner my mother was making, and how I couldn't wait to have some chicken. I reach the 3rd floor, which is accessed through the 2nd floor balcony, turn the generator off, and start making my way down. As I'm walking down the stairs, I see it out of the corner of my eye, standing in front of the 2nd floor entrance into the house. I focus my gaze on it. in complete disbelief of what I'm seeing. I remember very vividly telling myself not to take my eyes off it, so I could gauge if it were real or not. It being a black cloaked figure/man, the length of the door, with only its head and its hands exposed, that were a red/pink hue, like the flesh had been burnt or melted. Its gaze was piercing. My legs turned to jelly. I lost balance, falling down the stairs, but managing to hold on to the railings. And when I looked back, it was gone. I raced downstairs in complete horror, asking my father if he had seen it, or if he was just pulling a prank on me. But he just looked at me like I was crazy, and said I was imagining things. I know for sure it wasn't some fragment of my imagination. When I told my aunt this story, she told me her son had also seen him, a man in the house, but thought that he was talking nonsense. I have no family history of schizophrenia. This has never happened to me before, and it hasn't happened since. I still get goosebumps thinking about it 14 years later. Has anyone seen something resembling this? My closest guess is that it could have been a djinn. I was dating a girl on the rifle team I was on. We stayed late after school and practiced shooting. We were in ROTC. This was in Alabama, in the 90s. We stayed up until 7 p.m, then her mum would pick us up. We'd normally wait in the band room because it looked out onto the parking lot. This night it's late, dark, cold, wintertime, and the only people in the building are me, her, and our sergeant major, who was a tunnel rat in Vietnam, by far the hardest and most intense man I'd ever known. And the dude really inspired me. Great example of humanity. Anyway, me and her are standing in the band room, looking out this window, when about 6 feet away from us this huge double set of tubular bells suddenly starts vibrating and shaking violently. I turn and look at it, and before I can say anything, the whole instrument flies at us, flipping over at the end. It crashes past me about 2 feet away and smashes into the wall on the other side of the room. I hit 100% pure flight or flight panic. I don't look at her. I don't say, "Hey, did you see that?" I just bolt and run as fast as I could for the sergeant major. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I find the sergeant major in his office, and only then do I stop and turn around. She's half a step behind me, completely pale. We freak out, tell him everything, and he just tells us to stay in his office and goes to look. He comes back a minute later and asks if we were messing with the bells, because they are a mess on the floor, and we say no, and explain it again. The sergeant major just nods, and we all wait in his office. Then he escorts us out to her mum's car, through the band room. That was the last I ever heard about it from him. Me and the girl stopped seeing each other, and I've lost contact with her. But I'm positive she would tell the exact same story. My friend from Iraq told me a story some time ago about an experience his great-grandfather had with a genie in a ring. I'll go through the story and then the connections I see between the history of the story and my friend's family. The story. My friend was born in Baghdad, but I'm not sure of his family's origin. They are, or were, devout Christians. So the fact that his mother told me this story in total honesty is a testament to how serious they took the events. The great-grandfather, when he was a young boy, was playing in an abandoned house when he found a ring. Either there was something attached to the ring, or it was there in the building as well. But the way she described it was that it came with the ring. So whatever was attached to the ring was not malevolent. She says it took him all over the world at night and showed him different cities and sights. He accurately described places he had never been and couldn't have known or been to any of these places. This made his mother take the issue seriously. She contacted the local priest and begged him to perform an exorcism. The priest actually says she didn't recommend doing that because this wasn't the kind of spirit you could do that to. She begged anyway, and eventually the priest gave the exorcism and the spirit left forever. No word of what happened to the ring. She said the name of the spirit was Malak Saleh or something like that. Connections. The first connection is, of course, that from the original story the genie comes from a ring. Second is that on the manuscript, which was supposedly translated by a person who shares the last name with my friend's mother. And third is that the manuscript he translated was from Baghdad. Fourth is that the spirit did not grant any wishes or anything like that, but was able to more act independently. Fifth is that the ring was found in an abandoned building, which, according to popular theory, is where jinns tend to dwell. Sixth is that Galland, who wrote the first story to reach Europe, heard the story from a Catholic woman. And seventh is the church where the woman belonged to, and it's the same as my family's friends. In closing, I don't know what more to ask moving forward. I have these connections but no idea how to investigate further. Some of these connections are circumstantial and would only mean anything if the original story were true. And as much, I don't mind assuming the story is true for the purposes of investigating. I'm going to feel really silly if it was complete fiction. What do you guys think? This really unnerving event occurred a few weeks ago, and I have to admit, I'm still a little paranoid. As a 16-year-old girl, the 5 friends that were with me during that day are the same age and all female. We all decided to hang out at my house that day, considering we all haven't been with each other since the summer started. It was early afternoon by the time everyone had arrived. We were all having fun playing video games, chatting, and watching videos for the first few hours. A little later, as we sat through some quiet and awkward moments of boredom, one of my friends suggested we should go outside somewhere. Our first thought was to walk to a nearby grocery store, but that was immediately eliminated off the list, since it was going to be a 10 to 15 minute walk in 90-degree Fahrenheit heat. I spoke up, saying there's a small park only a few minutes away from my house. We all agreed to the idea, getting ourselves ready to head out. As I tell my mum where we're going, I lock the door behind us and start walking. We spend the last hour at the park. We're all exhausted, while at the same time not ready to leave just yet. We settle down at a picnic table and passed time chatting until one of my friends noticed a red car parked on the side of the street a little ways away from us, at the very front of the park. I didn't think anything of it at first, until she mentioned the man inside was repeatedly looking over at us. We thought it was odd, but nothing harmful. Still, we decided to leave, taking a different route home just in case. We arrived at the same street my house was on, relieved that we didn't see the same car, but anxious that it could appear again at any moment. It seemed like our suspicions were confirmed. The car then drove by us slowly, the man inside getting a closer look at us as we got a closer look at him and his vehicle. He was African American, slim, wearing a white baseball cap and muscle top, and driving a red 2003 Honda CR-V. He stopped adjacent to my house, out of all places. I was now unsure of what to do. One of my friends told me to call my parents, and I reluctantly complied. He called my dad and asked him to get us outside the house. He was slightly confused, but he agreed to do so anyway. And a few seconds later, I saw my dad on our front lawn, and we rushed over to him to tell him about the red car that was still parked near us. He ushered us inside, all while keeping an eye on the creepy man. We all sat down to take a rest, as my dad was taking pictures of the car and license plate. We were all discussing what just happened, and one of my friends apparently noticed something we did not. According to her, when the man parked his car, leaned back in his seat, he had his phone facing us through his rear window, and he was staring at us through his rear view mirror. It made me feel so sick and disgusted, wondering what that guy planned on doing with the photos and videos he took of us. We continued observing the same car that was in the same place for another 10 minutes, until my dad started pulling out of the driveway to leave for work. My dad started driving in the car's direction, and the creep booked it out of there, fearing the possible confrontation. My friends and I released a sigh of relief when we all returned to having a fun afternoon. At least now I have a picture of the car and the license plate, so I can identify it. I haven't seen the man ever since, and I hope it stays that way. I was in around 4th grade at the time. One of my teachers blew the whistle to let us know that recess was over, and we had to line up. The teachers did a head count and noticed that one of the students were missing, my friend Annie. Now, my school had a few trees on the playground making a little forest. One of the students noticed that there was a girl sitting under the tree. Everyone looked and saw the same thing. A girl with brown hair sitting under a tree, her back turned to us. Anne also has brown hair, so we assumed it was her. We all called for her, but she didn't move, and one of my teachers decided to go and get her. We all watch, waiting for her to fetch Anne, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Anne. She explained that she went to get her jacket from the fence, which was nowhere near the forest. Everyone noticed she was there too, and we all looked back at the teacher who went down to get this girl. She was already walking up from the forest, no girl with her. The other teacher asked her what happened, and the teacher said, "I went down there, and I looked away from the girl for a second and she was gone." There's no way Anne could have walked up from the tree to us without someone noticing. The trees weren't that dense, and we were all watching. Not to mention she came from behind us, where the jacket fence was. My elementary school was extremely old. To make matters worse, just a year prior to this, a man ended his wife's life just down the street from the school. They had 2 kids that went to this very school. I'm unsure what happened to the kids, but one of the kids was a girl that was in my class. But ever since that happened, we haven't seen her or her brother since. Maybe she perished and is now haunting the school. I don't know, but the memory of the ghost girl still haunts me. This is what happened to my cousin and I at a fishing trip. Till this day, my cousin and I can still not explain what we have seen. My cousin's family is located in Lansdale, and one night his family and I decided to head to a dock to fish at night. They planned to catch catfish during the night, and my cousin and I opted to walk towards the path to the end of the dock. At this time of day, the dock was almost pitch black, with a few lights on the dock path. Well, by the time we reached the end of the dock, we saw a small bridge connected to the dock and leading into the woods across the water from the dock. We decided to walk on the bridge to the woods and see who gets scared and runs back to the dock. Halfway over the bridge, we see a trash can under a light post, and next to the trash can was this person-like figure. My cousin and I believe at first it was just clothes piled up to resemble a person. But we both walk up to it, and that's when the pile of clothes/person looks up through its hood of a hoodie, looking straight at us while the light is directly on top of it. When we looked into the hoodie while the light is shining right on it, we saw pure darkness, no face, even when the light was shining in the hoodie. We freaked out and ran. We came back with family members and friends to show them what we saw, and when we returned, there was nothing. Till this day, we believe we saw a djinn, or something our brains couldn't possess. Everyone else believes it was just a homeless person, but my husband and I know what we saw, and it was pure darkness. When I was little, I walked home from the bus stop after school. I did this every day, and I thought that my neighborhood was completely safe. Everyone there was usually very nice. Plus, the bus stop was only a block or so away from my house at the time, so it was a short distance. I hadn't realized that at the time, but a lot of people had been taken, and attempts to take people were going on in the area. The school sent out the obligatory emails and phone calls informing the parents of the situation, but it hadn't yet reached me. So one day I'm on my merry way home and notice a blue truck heading in the opposite direction. I shrug it off, as cars always passed me whenever I walked home. Though the truck turned around at the first corner it could, I thought it strange, but I tried to rationalize it. They probably forgot something. I was wrong. The truck was now going in the same direction as I was also going around the same speed I was, and this weirded me out, so I pick up the pace. I could hear the truck's engine accommodated the speed slightly, with it picking up as well. After that, I booked it. I ran as quickly as I could to my home, and I could hear the truck's engine roar as it got faster. I somehow made it back to my house, slammed the locks on the door as quickly as possible, and was so grateful that my mum left the door unlocked that day, especially since I'd been trying to have her leave it locked so that I could use my new house key. I don't know if they were targeting me or not, but I'm glad I didn't get to find out. This story begins when I was in 4th grade, so I was about 9. As I was a bit young for my grade, because of me being younger than the other kids, I didn't really get along with them very well. So whenever we would go out to recess, I would make sure to bring whatever book I was reading at the time. I had my own special place I liked to sit and read. It was a little corner of the playground where barely anybody went. It was a large patch of clovers and other overgrown plants, and had a large bush with a gap in between it and the fence. I used to love to sit there. One day I went over to my usual spot and sat with my back facing the bush. I had been reading for a while when I thought I heard a rustling sound behind me. Sometimes squirrels and chipmunks would hang out in the gap between the bush and the fence, so I didn't think much of it. That was until I heard heavy breathing and someone tugging on my pigtails. Surprised, I whipped my head around, thinking my hair had gotten caught on a branch or something, but instead there was a boy. He was sitting hunched in a gap between the fence and the bush, leaning forwards between the branches of his face, mostly obscured by leaves, and his arm outstretched, trying to grab at my hair. I screamed, bolted for the picnic table area where the supervising teachers were. I was a very shy little thing back then, so I didn't say anything. Instead, for a long time after that, I sat and read by the teachers during recess. About 3/4 of the way through the school year, I made a new friend, Matt. He was also a bit of an outcast, and when we got assigned to be in a reading group together, we became friends fast. He was nice enough, but even my 9-year-old self could tell there was something off about him. He was too clingy, barely ever leaving my side, and constantly coming up with excuses to touch me. I, of course, didn't have any other friends, so I ignored it. However, one day he told me that he liked me. I had no idea how to react to this and just said nothing. He apparently took my silence as a yes because he called my home phone later. My mum handed me the phone saying that a friend was asking to talk to me. Since my parents were watching TV downstairs, I decided to go up to my room so I wouldn't bother them. It was Matt. I could barely even say hello before he started saying some seriously weird stuff. He started saying things like, "What do you want to name our kids? When we get to high school, let's run away and start a family. I bet you look really cute when you're asleep." Now this would be creepy for anyone, but I was 9. I had no idea how to handle the situation, so I just stayed away from him. He wasn't happy about this, constantly glaring at me, and just being all around super creepy. A year later, I was halfway through 5th grade and had a serious bully problem. But that's a story for another day. It got so bad that my dad decided one day to not wait until the next school year and instead switched schools the following Monday. 5th grade at my new school was great, and starting in 6th grade, my parents got me my first phone. I, of course, called up Clara, who became my friend after the Matt incident, and I let her know about my new phone. A couple more months passed, and one night, I got a call from an unknown number. Picking up the phone, I froze when I heard Matt's voice. I still vividly remember what he said. "Hey baby, I missed you so much, why'd you leave me?" Not even a second after he had said that, I hung up, blocked his number and called up Clara, as she was the only person at my old school who had my number. Apparently after school, he had asked to see her phone to call his mum, as he had forgotten his at home. She handed it over to him, as she was very kind but quite a gullible girl, and soon she noticed that he was taking a while, and then had a pen out and was writing something on his arm. She yanked the phone away and panicked, sprinting off. Looking down at her phone, she saw that he had opened my contact info. I was freaked out, but felt safe as I had blocked his number. That didn't stop him though. He would call me every single week from a different phone, leaving at least 10 messages each time. Each time I would block one number, he'd somehow call from another one. When I got a new phone, the calls stopped, and I forgot about it until freshman year. At my high school, there were a couple of kids from my old school, and I suddenly remembered Matt. I asked one of the boys, Harry, if he knew what happened to Matt. According to Harry, he got expelled. Teachers had caught him smelling and touching girls' hair, groping female students, and trying to sneak into the girls' locker room, and writing extremely explicit stuff about himself and other girls in the grade, as well as a few other things which I can't remember. The realization hit me like a semi-truck. Smelling and touching girls' hair, the boy hiding in the bush when I was in 4th grade. Matt, let's never meet again. This happened in Iraq in 2018. It was a very stormy day, and you can say thunder and sandstorms cover the whole sky, making it an orange color. The wind was so strong, it made the doors open and close. It made windows slam roughly, and there was this howling sound like screams. I was alone in the family house, where all my grandfathers used to visit. I was playing some games trying to ignore the weather and that creepy sound. After an hour of playing, I heard someone knocking at the door. I looked through the window, which allowed me to see the street. It was strange, no one was there. I thought it was the wind sound, so I ignored it, but then the knocking happened again. I walked to the door to see who was there, but before I opened it and said who's there, I waited for just a moment, and there was someone who said, "I'm just an old man. Can you let me in your house? I can't stand such weather." I opened the door. His whole appearance was very strange, very odd. He had a long white beard, with very old clothes and a black and grey turban. He was putting some small cloth in his mouth as a mask to protect him from the sand. His right eye was white, and he was tall. The The strangest thing was his right hand. It was so black, and was wearing some strange rings. He sat in a chair and I said, "Do you need anything, sir?" He looked at me with a smile and said that he'd like some tea and water. He said that since I was very kind, he'd offer me 2 gifts. One was to answer a question, and the other will be foresight into what will happen in the future. I looked at him in bewilderment. How could he know the future? He's just an old man. He told me he was a sage, a sorcerer, and that he's traveled to many parts of the world. He said he had taken many steps to become one, and he got struck by thunder on his hand, and that he had to put his hand on fire for a full day, and then on water for 3 days to gain control of elements. There were also these strange rings. He said each ring, his jinn and ifrits were inside, and they were his servants. He captured them in the desert, and he summoned them. He then went on to ask what I wanted to know of the future. I looked at him and saw his hand was on fire, and it didn't seem to hurt him at all. I was scared and frozen. He told me at first I would be moving to one country for 1 year, and then one of my family members would perish in a peaceful and painless death, and told me the Middle East would have problems, but it would be fixed in later years, and that Europe and America will have disasters, especially America. It would have ice, fire, and earthquakes. After telling me all of this, he began walking to the door and started to leave. He told me he would be back next year on the same day and thanked me for everything. I was left there shocked and so stunned. Everything he said came true. My grandmother died in the hospital. She had a coma and her brain stopped. The doctors said it was without any pain. And not to mention that there were problems with the Middle East. Hopefully, it will be sorted. And America has suffered from very low temperatures, making it almost freeze. And the weather there was awful. Not to mention the forest fires that have happened quite recently as well. Is it all a coincidence? Or is what he said true? I'm now waiting to see when he will return.